Today we're whittling this panda out of a 1 by 1 inch piece of wood. Normally something like this would be a lot more difficult to make compared to something like this, for example, because the proportions on this one are much more difficult to get right. However, today I'm going to provide some exact measurements based on this figure that I already made, and I'm also going to provide this sketch in a free to download PDF file. The link is in the description of this video. Here's everything that you're absolutely going to need for this project. You're going to need a pencil, a knife that you can make details with, a 1 by 1 inch piece of wood, and something to measure with, like a tape measure or a ruler. What comes to the piece of wood, it needs to be at least 5 centimeters or 2 inches long. What I have here is a bit over 10 centimeters. I'd say about 7 centimeters is as low as I would personally go, because having a longer piece of wood makes it so much easier to hold on to the figure while carving. Apart from these things, I'm also going to use a cut resistant glove, especially with these kinds of small projects where you're automatically holding the piece a lot closer to where you're cutting. A glove makes this a lot safer, and a small piece is also much easier to hold on to with this kind of a rubber grip. I'm also using a bigger roughing knife to make some of the initial cuts that we're going to make a lot faster and easier. But like I said, these ones right here are the only ones that are absolutely necessary. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to measure 5 centimeters and make a line. Now this is the area we're going to work on. I'm going to extend this line to all of these sides just to make things a little bit easier to grasp. The first cut we're going to make is going to be a V cut, and it's going to start 21 millimeters from this end, and it's going to be about 7 millimeters wide. It's also going to be 7 millimeters deep. I also think it makes a lot of sense to draw this on both sides like this. Then we can start making the V-cuts. It's easiest to start from these sharp edges. And then we can start moving closer to the center. Next we're going to make the same kind of V-cut, the same width and the same depth this way. And that's going to separate the feet from each other. And we're making the legs first because that's one of the most difficult parts of this project. This is where a longer knife comes in very handy, because it reaches all the way here, which means that I can make these V-cuts all the way through quite easily. Now if you don't have a knife this long, you can also use your detail knife and make the V-cuts like this with the tip of the blade. Just be careful not to puncture the opposite side that you're not cutting at the moment with the tip of the blade, because if I push this too deep, then the wood is going to split where we don't want it to split. Now this V-cut is deep enough so that it becomes a little bit awkward, which means that you're just gonna have to remove small slices at a time and make lots of repetitions. Next we're gonna sketch where the paws are going to be. And they're gonna go like this. The hind paws are about 9 millimeters in length. And then this one is going to start where this one ends. So that means I can continue this line over here and then measure another 9 millimeters. The front paws are slightly smaller. This one is 8 millimeters. So the other paw starts about where this one ends. But in this case, due to this paw not touching the ground, the more important measurement is from the nose to the end of the paw. And that's going to be 5 millimeters, like that. Next we're going to make some stop cuts, and the important thing to get right is that this part is going to be removed, this part is going to be removed, this one, and this one is going to be removed. So now we have the 9mm paws over here, 8mm over here, about the same 8mm over here, except now this one is going to be a little bit different. But for now, we can focus on these areas that need to be removed. These two ones in the middle are going to be cut straight up like that. And we're going to go here about to the 7mm line again. I'm going to start with this. So first I'm making some sweeping cuts. I'm using this paring cut version of the sweeping cut to easily get rid of the bulk of this mass on this area we're about to remove. And then I'm moving on to these stop cuts. That's good enough for now. Then the next one, which is this one, it's a similar thing. First I'm making sweeping cuts because that's the easiest way to remove most of this. And then something that's more like a stop cut. This one on the front can also be made the same way. And then this one right here is going to be slightly different. Like I said, this one here is a little bit different because this part of the leg is more forward, so we can't just cut straight here. Instead, we're going about 4mm forward, like that, and making a cut like this. I think the push cut version of the sweeping cut is better in the beginning because we don't want to damage this leg too much. And I think the push cut version is more controllable than the paring cut version. So I'm doing as much as I can with this one. And then doing the rest with this paring cut version. And then again, we're moving on to the stop cuts. Next we're going to take this foot off the ground, just like a millimeter. We can adjust it later, something like that. Just so that it doesn't touch the ground anymore. Then we can create a slight curvature somewhere from here to this corner, like that. And again, I'm using push cuts for this. And a few cuts like this that I call the reverse push cut. So the blade is supported right here and right here. And even some paring cuts can work quite well with the thumb on the other side over here. Next we're going to start taking away these sharp edges. And we're going to start from the inside, because these are going to be much easier to make, which means that if you cut these ones first and then you struggle with making these ones clean, you might end up with paws that are too narrow. But if we cut some excess from here, we can just spread the paws apart slightly more and the figure will still have decent proportions. One good reason for making the basic shape of the legs first is also that while making these slightly more difficult cuts, we have this huge flat area over here protecting our non-dominant hand from the blade. Because now if the blade slips, we have a bigger area blocking it. Before we go and work on these outside parts, we still have these edges left to finish. So they work the same way as all of these over here, except that with this one, we don't want to cut straight upward because then we lose a lot of this. Instead, we're going to use this 5 centimeter line. I'm going to redraw it because it's been worn out. I'm going to connect it over here with a curvature like this so that then we have plenty of space for all of this. And this one is going to go straight to this 7 millimeter line. It's going to be made the same way as these ones. Now the shape of this doesn't matter that much as long as it's decently comfortable to hold. So I'm just going to be using the rough cut version of the sweeping cut. And then moving on to the push cut version. And then moving on to the stop cuts. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to slim down the sides because the Panda is not going to be this wide. And the end result, this way, should be about 2 centimeters. I'm making rough cuts because I know I can control this pretty well and not take too much wood away. But if you feel like you might accidentally make a deeper cut than you want, these push cuts are also a great option. And it doesn't take that much longer, but then you can be sure that you're not going to cut a big chunk off accidentally. And even if you're using rough cuts, once you start getting closer to that 2 centimeter thickness, push cuts are necessary. In this Panda that I already made, the hind limbs are actually slightly more than 2 centimeters apart. But the important thing we're making here is that this midsection of the body is 2 centimeters wide. So I'm going to do the same thing over here, leaving these slightly wider apart, but slimming these other areas down to 2 centimeters. And remember that the point is not to take the same amount of wood away from both sides. Like me, you've probably made a slight mistake already where something isn't quite in the center over here. So the important thing to look at is that the paws are going to be the same size and not that you remove the same amount of wood from both sides. So over here, this one was and still is a little bit thicker from here to here, which means I'm going to remove more wood from this side. That's close enough. It's better to leave 1 millimeter or a half more than to take even a 0.5 millimeter too much, because we can always later on slim it down just a little bit if it looks off. Next we're going to slim down where the head is going to be. So here on the front I made these 2 lines starting from the back of these limbs and then made these 2 curves that end up in this point that is 13 millimeters from one line to the other. And now we're trying to remove this bit of wood without making the paws smaller. So the cutting direction is a bit slanted like this. And then the same over here, except that now the line goes a little bit differently because the paw is over here. Something like that is good enough for now. We don't want to go too narrow. So it's better that it's a little bit over even. Well, it's about exactly 13 millimeters, so that's also good. And now with these modifications we made on the sides, making it more narrow and slimming down the head, we can finally make these edges a lot rounder. Here we can make a V cut. That makes rounding this part of the leg a little bit easier. Same over here on the other side of the same leg. And it's the same in all of these places where the leg ends and the rest of the body begins. It's good to keep in mind that at the same time we're trying to make this stomach area round like this. This line, so this inside corner between the stomach and this limb, can also go a few millimeters further forward. The bottom of this paw right here also doesn't need to be flat because it's going to be tilted like that. So we can remove quite a big chunk of wood from here and make it turn like that. Next we're going to carve some of this curvature of the back. And the highest part of the panda's back is on top of this leg. Around here at the tip of the paw. So right about there. And then from here we can draw a curve that smoothly connects to this 5 centimeter point. I'm extending this line to the other side of the back, so that I get the highest point over here too, and then making this curve on the other side also. It's better to make it too pointy than too flat, because then we can take it down later. Something like that. And then over here above the front limbs, the height difference is only going to be about 1 millimeter compared to this. The back of the ears is 1 centimeter away from this edge, and the height of the ears is 2 centimeters from the bottom of the feet. So right around there. The ears are going to be under 2 millimeters thin, and then we're just going to draw a curvature like this that leaves about 5 millimeters over here. And then the ears connect to this part of the back with an almost straight line, not quite. It's going to be slightly curved. So this is pretty close to what we're looking for. And in between making cuts, you can always try to compare to the sketch. I'm also going to connect this line over here with a few V-cuts, because everything's going to be made a lot rounder still. The position of the ears is still marked here, so I'm going to draw it across like that. I'm making it a little bit wider than it's actually going to be, because the proportions of these facial features are pretty delicate, so even like a 0.5 millimeter judgment error might result in less pleasing proportions. So thicker ears are fine for now. This marks an area we're only going to round just a little bit like that, but then the rest of this edge all the way can be made a lot rounder, especially over here. We want to create this kind of a nice curve. It's just a circular shape around the midsection of the body. We can also make the tip of the snout a little bit rounder. Like that. Next, these 3 paws need this separation between the paws and the rest of the leg. And that's only going to be about 2 millimeters deep. And the paws are going to be about 3 millimeters thick. To get the shape going, we're just going to make some very tight sweeping cuts at first. And then we can make some V cuts. Now we're going to go back to refining the head shape. We're going to start this by making a few very tight sweeping cuts. They can be a little bit deeper over here on the corners, but here in the middle, this will only be about 1 millimeter deep. Whereas over here, the distance is more like 2 millimeters or even slightly more. Then, about halfway between the front of the ears and the tip of the snout, we're going to start making sweeping cuts on both sides of the head, and the angle is going to be about the same as with the ears. So the front of the ear is pretty much pointing towards the tip of this paw, and we're going to make these cuts in parallel to this. At the base of the snout, so over here, the thickness of the snout is going to be about 1/3 of the thickness of the entire head. Now we're starting to get to the point where precise measurements are not going to cut it anymore. So the head shape we're looking for is something like this. The side profile of a similar head shape can be seen in this sketch. And now we're just trying to get closer to that shape. So that means making this a little bit more narrow. We're creating a slight distinction between the forehead and the snout. A very, very slight inside curve right around here. And then a straighter top of the snout and a round forehead. Also, taking away sharp edges helps a lot. The underside of the head is going to need a little bit of this curvature. So an inside curve over here. From the tip of the nose, this part of the face is going to be in an angle like that, which means we need a few push cuts over here. Like that. You can make the edges a little bit rounder again. So something like this already starts to look a little bit like a panda. And now, when we remove some of this wood from the back of the ears, the general shape is going to look a lot nicer. So next we can make this stop cut. It's going to be about 2 millimeters over here between this leg and the head. Over here on the other side, they're connected with this curvature. So from here, I'm sketching a curve like this. That's going to be where the leg meets the side of the head. And then over here, it's just a curve like this that goes all the way over here to this leg. And now we can slim down this area to create a neck and make it flow smoothly over here to the thickest area of the body, which is the middle section. So that means removing some wood also from the shoulder blades over here so that we can create this more of a ridge-like shape. There's a few more things we can do before we go into the finer adjustments and iterations of the previous steps. And those things are the ears, this paw, and this little hump on the back. And I'm gonna start with the ears. The distance between the ears is about 4 millimeters. And we're gonna start this with V-cuts in the very middle of this 4 millimeter area until we get to this level, the level of the forehead. And then we can start making this kind of a sweeping cut motion and then define the edge of the ear a bit better with these stop cuts. Then the ears can be made rounder. I'm starting from behind the ears, making this curvature. And I'm making those cuts a little bit in an angle like this, so that then the top of the ears is thinner than the bottom part. And then, since we want to make the ears round like this, we also need to make these V-cuts. Like that. And then the other side. And then we can round these corners too. From this side I'm still missing this inside corner that marks the edge of the head. So I'm making it with the tip of the blade like this. And now that we have the basic shapes of the head, we can make this paw a little better. The entire leg is still a little bit thick, so I'm removing some wood from here first. And then a few sweeping cuts over here make this look more like a paw. Next we're gonna make this hump. So this is made with a sweeping cut over here. So if the hump is on top of the legs, the sweeping cut is gonna be somewhere over here. A few cuts like this. And now we have this nice bump over here. Next we're gonna go into adjusting these shapes we've already made, because we want to finish everything to its final level of detail before we cut this off. And then we just need to make the tail and finish this area. So a few things to keep in mind in this step are that this part of the stomach should be higher than this part of the stomach. In my case over here it's not like that, so I'm gonna fix that. And then we can make some sweeping cuts around where the limbs start, so that we can create this distinction between the leg and the neck and the stomach. Another thing is that we can add a little bit of curvature on this leg with a few sweeping cuts. And then also one thing that's quite important is that we bring this inside corner a little bit closer over here, so that we actually get to that 5 centimeter mark. And why that's important is because the body should not be this long. Instead, the leg is extended further away and the body is slightly shorter than what it is right now. Also, I think this is a very nice little detail, that the heel is lifted off the ground. In my opinion, it makes the pose a little bit more dynamic. And that lifted heel can be made with just a few push cuts like this. So now we've made everything except the tail, and now it's time to just refine the shapes that you already have. So if you're striving for a result something like this, here are all the profiles of this figure. I highly suggest also looking at some online images. But if you want to keep your figure a little rougher like this, which is also, in my opinion, quite a nice, more minimalistic look, you can just skip the smoothing and go straight to making the tail. Now just very quickly about how this smoothing / refining part works is that you look for places where things are a little bit out of proportion or where there are some rough parts, and you make very small adjustments, very small cuts, and this very shallow push cut is the most important cut during this step. But there are also some other cuts that you might need, like these stop cuts. Now, two things that I think are important to mention here are two main things that, in my opinion, distinguish a panda's head from that of a brown bear's, are that the ears are closer to each other and that the head isn't as round, it's more bottom heavy. So over here, the cheeks are wide, but then over here, the head shape kind of tapers up a little bit. I mean, obviously, if you paint the figure as a panda, people are gonna see it as a panda. But if you want to go into these details, it's a good idea to pay attention to the head shape and the positioning and the shape of the ears. Because right now, even without paint, I think this face shape resembles a panda way more than a brown bear. Now I've come to the point where I'm satisfied with the refinements, and it's time to remove this excess bit of wood and make the tail. And even though the tail is going to be slightly more inward compared to this heel, what we want to do right now is leave a little bit of extra wood over here. So I'm just continuing these V cuts. Once you get closer to the point where this might break off, it's important to keep this finger away from the cutting line. And then this last bit can be sliced away with the tip of the blade. Like that. And next we need to make this a little bit rounder and push it slightly more inward so that the foot is further away than the tail. The tail can be made with some V-cuts, and those V-cuts continue over here in between the legs. And then we need to do some rounding and a little bit of cleanup and some final adjustments. That's it for the project. Let me know in the comments if this kind of slightly more detailed small-scale carving is something you want to see more of, or if you prefer the more beginner-friendly versions of these 1 by 1 inch projects.